Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming here for this very, 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 very short meeting, we hope. We only have one bill that we need to take a look at, brief discussion, and vote on it. So I'm going to turn this over to the attorney, and he will explain to you Senate Bill 127, State Government Grants and Contracts, Reimbursement of Direct Cost.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 127, as this bill came in, current law requires that for a nonprofit entity receiving a grant or contract from the state that does not have a federal negotiated rate would be allowed to receive at least 10% for an indirect cost rate. The bill, as introduced, had language to align that with the federal OMB rate, which is currently 15%. You do have a reprint on your desk. The sponsor submitted an amendment that she testified to at the hearing that would alter the bill to say the greater of the federal guidance or 15%. In the event that the OMB would be lowered below the current 15%. There was another amendment submitted to make the bill emergency. The House had adopted that. I also attached the amendments that were put on the House bill. There was also a reporting requirement added that would require reporting related to salaries and administrative costs of senior staff. The amendment before you is based on a discussion I had with the chair this morning. So what the reprint before you would be to do the amendment to clarify that it would be the greater of the de minimis rate or 15%. The bill also adds in some language that's just there for background. There is currently a Maryland Efficient Grants Application Council. Part of their charge and what they are working on, you all extended them last year, adding the comptroller to the council. They're charged with reviewing the entire life cycle of the grants process, part of that. And according to their 2024 year-end report, part of that would be looking at indirect costs. So the amendment you have before you has a sunset provision so that these provisions being changed in the bill would terminate June 30, 2028. The council's report is due July 1, 2027. So based on whatever recommendations you receive in that report, the legislature would have the 2028 session to address any legislative changes or extensions that would be needed related to that report. So that's the provision before you instead of the emergency effective date. And the reprint before you also does not have that associated reporting requirement. I think pending because the mega council is also reviewing kind of the whole process. Senator Quarterman.
Okay, you heard the remarks of the attorney and the explanation of the amendments to the bill. Are there any questions or comments? Senator Quarterman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Phil, just a quick question. It sounds like a majority of the amendments to do about the rate, the whole 15% or the whatever this de minimis OMB. I don't know what that is. Like, can you explain that? Like, because I get the 15% or greater, but like what? I don't understand that other part. I'm trying to figure out of what that potential rate may or may not be.
Can you turn my mic on? So the federal uniform guidance is guidance related to federal grants and contracts. And so it specifies, allowable indirect costs. So indirect costs are things that are not, those are things that are less identifiable. So like if you have a grant, say for $100,000 to perform a certain service, the service being provided is the direct cost. The indirect costs are kind of the overhead expenses. And so those are generally things that are less identifiable. So they can be things like rent, utilities, other types of expenses. So it's kind of like the ongoing operational costs of the nonprofit entity or the grant or contract recipient that are not really necessarily quantifiable. They're kind of shared or pooled costs. Larger organizations, such as like large Research One universities or other larger nonprofits, actually have negotiated rates with the federal government. So this bill would not be applicable to them. This is for entities that do not have a federal negotiated rate. And I would note the fiscal note notes that, so basically, it's not going to necessarily increase the overall cost of a grant, but within the grant, the amounts allocated to direct and indirect costs is being changed. So it's going from a 1090 split to a 1585 split. And so the fiscal note just did raise the question of whether or not, what impact that have. I don't have any information. The testimony submitted, I didn't have any testimony submitted from any grant-making entities. So I can't comment to the potential impact of that, but the fiscal note has pointed that out.
Okay. Oh, I'm still confused on, I'm sorry. De minimis rate, though, what is that?
So the federal government has.
Sounds like something.
Yeah, so within the federal guidance, there's a de minimis rate. So if for entities that don't have those negotiated rates.
Okay.
Which the negotiated rates involve a lot. I mean, it's not just like sitting down at a table. There's actual like financial auditing
Sure,
and things like that.
establishment, how they get to it.
And so this is generally for like a smaller organization is not really going to have the capacity to sit down with the federal government and negotiate a rate, and they may not be doing the volume of rates that a larger institution would. So there's a de minimis rate that's kind of recognized. It was recently increased from 10 to 15.
Does that come out like on an annual basis or a monthly basis? Or
It's on the grant.
It's on the grant.
On the grant amount.
Ah, so it's a certain percentage of the grant amount.
So the indirect cost is a percentage of.
So is it an established percentage on the grant already?
It can vary. I mean, there's different ways that it can that the indirect costs are attributed and accounted. So I mean, different kinds of grants have.
Do we know what that variance could potentially be as far as, the reason I'm asking is because like the 15% is very clear. It's either 50% or this de minimis rate, but is that
Whichever one's higher.
correct? But is that de minimis rate, is that, I don't know, 5%? Is it 20%? Is it 50%? I don't know.
The current federal rate's 15.
It is 15.
Current federal rate is 15.
Okay. So it's equal. So it's the same then. It's 15 and 15 is.
Currently, it's equal, yes. I think the intent of the amendment was in the event of a federal change below the current 15.
I got you. I see where we're
preserve
going
the
at now.
floor
I
of
got you.
15.
I got you.
But I would know current law says at least 10. So current law
Okay.
does not prevent
Yep. I see where we're going
excess
with it.
of
Okay.
10%.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Are there any other questions or concerns or comments? I think we're ready to decide whether or not we will support Senate Bill 127. What is your pleasure?
Second.
It's been moved and properly second that we give an okay to Senate Bill 127. Those who are in favor, raise your hand. Any opposition? Thank you all very, very much. And that ends the discussion and the business of the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee Procurement Subcommittee. Thank you all very much. And, all right, thank you.